Oh, fantastic. Good morning, everybody. We are live on LinkedIn. I think we're live on LinkedIn anyway. Rob, what do you think?
We might be. We'll
We
find.
might be.
We'll find out, won't we?
We will. we will. We will. Hopefully, if you're off in LinkedIn land, you saw a little pop up saying we've gone live on LinkedIn. This is our first foray into live streaming on LinkedIn, so this will be an interesting experiment, both for us on a technical basis, but also, just see what happens. We've done lots of preparation for this, haven't we, Rob?
Yes, of course we have.
We are good. We are live. I've got someone in the background telling me we are live as well. So, for those of you who don't know, perhaps let's start with some introductions, shall we, Mr. Robson? Why don't you go first?
Oh, I wasn't expecting that.
Ah.
Yes, I'm Rob Robson. I'm Director of People Science and Chief Operating Officer of the People Experience Hub. So I look after a lot of stuff, but as well as client delivery, I look after the thinking, the framework behind what we do.
Cool. And which job of the two jobs you've got, which is your favourite?
Oh, People Science is more interesting and less stressful.
No, that's fair. That's fair. And then for those who don't know me, my name's Ted Hewett. I am the head of employee listening programs here at the People Experience. So recently job changed, which has been really cool. I get the joy of hanging out with interesting people, talking to them about the way they do employee listening, and actually trying to bring some of those programs to life in a meaningful way. It's really cool. It's a really cool thing, and I don't have to split my time like that. It's really fun in that sense. I just get to do things I like most of the time, which is really nice. It's just talking to people, which is kind of what we're doing today. So if in case you haven't seen, today we're here to talk about our insights report. Rob, actually, maybe you can give just a bit of an overview of what the insights report is.
Yeah, it's I suppose in some ways it mirrors what we do with our clients. We take the data from the range of clients that we work with who've used our PX3 framework. We squash it all together, all the data from the last year or so, squash it all together and see what insights it can give to us.
And this was something because you worked really closely with Luigi to pull all this together,
Yeah,
right?
I do the real work in it.
You did. If Luigi's watching this, I'd like a comment from him. That would really make my day about his impression of that.
I doubt he's watching.
He has just had twins, so fair play. He's got things going on. So look, like for anyone who kind of downloads it, I've read through it a couple of times, and to me, as someone who's not in the sort of people science sphere, there's just there's a lot of information in there, but it's really clear actually some of the findings that there were, and I've picked out a couple that I want to kind of get into that I think are particularly not just interesting and insightful, but like have some quirks about them that I'd really like to understand in a bit more detail, and really want to look into that today. But before we kind of kick off on that, there's something I was reading as I was reading through it. If you're like me again, don't spend a lot of time looking at spreadsheets and graphs and stuff like that. Some of the numbers in here might be a little confusing. And at the beginning of the guide, there is in fact like a whole page just sort of explaining like how to use it and what they mean. But for those people I'll give you an example actually. So when we talk about employee engagement in the report, what we're saying is the average index score for employee engagement is 73%. What does that even mean, Rob?
Well, so every question we ask is on a scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Now, some people might describe that as 1 to 5, but there's a best practice says anchor to text. So strongly disagree to strongly agree. And strongly, we assign a score to each of those. So strongly disagree gets a 0. Disagree gets 25, neutral gets 50, agree gets 75, and believe it or not, strongly agree gets 100.
Cool.
And so when we roll that up to an index, or when we do that for a question, for all the responses, the question gets an overall score. Now 71, 73? I think you said 73 is almost exactly the equivalent of everybody agreeing, because that
but
would
not
be
quite important.
That would be 70. That would be 75.
Yeah,
basically. So everybody being neutral would be 50. So if the score is more than 50, it's broadly positive, and if it's less than 50, I guess you say it's negative.
gotcha.
But actually, we don't see that many scores below 50.
And it's of course because it's aggregated, right? Do you know, like, and I see
Yeah.
because I don't. How big is the sample size we're talking about here when we get to a number like 73? Like loose, like I know you're not gonna like. I'm not asking for the exact number, but like, if you had to put it, if
I'd
you had to guess,
say, I don't know, something like 50,000 people or
okay,
so. I'm not sure exactly, but
yeah, it's a big sample.
I think one of the challenges is that we can only work with like the questions that were more commonly used, because we have to be able to pull that data together to represent one sample. So we
Yeah,
can't use every survey and every response from across the board. So I'm not sure of the exact number.
gotcha. That's
Yeah.
interesting in and of itself.
Yeah, okay.
So that okay, cool. So now we've got a bit of an understanding then of like the numbers and that. That's actually really helpful to me. The three things that we kind of pulled out. Let's start with the first one. Number one. So the report mentions that while employees are more likely to stay with their employer, their motivations and commitment have decreased.
Yeah.
What? Let's just unpick that for a second. What does that even mean?
So when we look at the results, the specific question of I intend to be here in 12 months' time has increased, and it's increased, I think, more than any other in our engagement index. And although actually our engagement index score has increased slightly over the last year, but it's broadly represented by that intention to stay increasing, and we've seen some softening on those other scores. So what we mean then is that when they look at the questions around, my being, so essentially being here motivates me to do my best work every day, and is scoring lower. The the and we've got a few other sort of commitment-based questions, basically. So what we're seeing is actually that the willingness to stay has gone up quite a bit. Actually, the willingness to recommend employers has gone up a tiny little bit
The
as well.
advocacy
But
piece, right?
advocacy, but motivational, questions seem to have softened a bit, and I think that's probably a lot to do with. I mean, it could be a number of things, but I think one of the things that we've been talking about is that the job market or the labour market is softening slightly, so people are a little bit more likely to hang on to their job, maybe a little bit less likely to be thinking of moving on.
Yeah, because I was gonna like so the kind of why. So what's driving this? There's an environmental factor. Obviously, a couple of years ago, everyone was talking about the Great Resignation and
Yeah,
this move to like hybrid,
yeah,
post-pandemic
yeah.
world, all this sort of stuff. Is that in your opinion then, and based on what we can see in the data, is that starting to tail off?
Well, I'm a bit of a skeptic when it comes to
Oh, really? You a
yeah,
skeptic? Surely
when
not.
it comes to these like eye-catching terms like quiet quitting, great resignation. Certainly, great resignation. We're not seeing huge evidence of intention for people to quit. Quiet quitting, maybe slightly more so, but I think what we've got to remember is that, like, broadly speaking, we're saying that people are saying that they're quite engaged at work.
Mm,
70 a score of 73%, and I think it's in very direct contrast to some of the headlines that you do see,
mm.
which is that everybody's disengaged. And I posted about that on LinkedIn earlier this week. I think there's a particular company that may rhyme with schmallop, that that produce these
Quite
numbers,
unreal, man.
that produce these numbers, and it's very, I think it's very dangerous and a little bit disingenuous, if I'm honest, that they're not treating, if you agree with the question, they're not treating that in the same way as if you disagree.
Yeah,
They're weighting all their categorizations of they first of all, they categorize people as engaged or not engaged,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
and, and it's so much easier to be categorized as not engaged than it is to be categorized as engaged. And so I think it's all a bit disingenuous. And actually, so the backdrop for this whole report really is that actually people are quite engaged at work. It's not that that things couldn't be better. It's not that everything's perfect, and it's certainly not that that they see their work environment as being perfect. But generally speaking, the evidence suggests that people are fairly happy.
Yeah. But it's not like, I know maybe happiness is actually an interesting index to get into in terms of a driver, because we know, if we know that people are, one of the other things that came out in there was connection and
Yeah.
belonging, right? They're kind of up. We see them as improving. I remember I did a talk on this Disrupt HR a couple of weeks ago. In terms of, though, that's an interpersonal connection, right? And that sort of driver, you and me talked a bit about that, the maybe slightly problematic question of, do you have a best friend at work, right? The very binary kind of yay or nay vibe.
Yeah.
Those sorts of connection pieces and those interpersonal relationships are, in as we measure those as becoming better, and we see people essentially saying they're more engaged, there seems to be a very strong connection there. Is that connection between connection and engagement, is that something that you see as integral? Is that something that's really, really important to businesses to focus on at the moment?
I think it's interesting because when you purely look at it as a predictor of engagement, it's not our strongest. It's one of our weaker ones from what we describe as the felt experience. So it's not as important, for example, as sense of purpose, enjoyment, growth, and I think, but I was really intrigued by that when I was doing the work on the insights report, and I think one of the challenges is, and this is where it gets a little bit nerdy, but the scores are generally high. So people are saying they have strong relationships at work. And I think one of the challenges is that when the regression techniques that you use to actually see what's driving what, they're looking for a linear relationship. So if all the responses are clustered towards the top, it doesn't see that, and it says, well, it's not that important.
You just explain that a bit more
So
to me, because
yeah.
especially when you talk about like a linear relationship, what do you mean in the context of that's
So
really interesting.
what the techniques are looking for when you're generally doing your drivers analysis is to say that when connection goes up, so too does engagement.
Right.
And in a perfect world, it's like a one, perfect world, it's 1-to-1. And we don't see that sort of variability in the scores. It's most people are saying that they have strong relationships at work, so we don't see that linear relationship. So we did a different test that said, okay, what happens when people actually, when we categorize people as saying they either have a strong connection or they have a weak sense of connection at work, and we cut out the people in the middle. Then you see like the weak relationships. So if people are saying they've got poor relationships, they're far more likely to be disengaged. So the connection is a stronger influence when it's not there.
So I think it's more, the way I read that and interpreted that was lack of connection is a driver of disengagement more than connection is a driver of engagement.
Yeah,
right?
and I think quite rightly, basically people expect to have good relationships at work. You don't really want to walk into work in the morning kind of, waiting for a sort of metaphorical punch in the face.
But is it maybe more that, like, humans are social creatures, right? We like having good relationships with each other. It's an important, not to quote the Maslow stuff, but it is a fundamental part of our hierarchy of needs. And I could feel that. I wouldn't want to go to work with. I would happily do a job. I would more happily do a job I don't like with people I like.
Yeah.
Than a job I like with people I don't like, if that makes sense. And that seems.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, that connection, which is part of our felt experience within the PX3 framework, is, the felt experience fundamentally is about human needs. So all of those aspects, autonomy, purpose, growth, belonging, enjoyment, connection, they are, broadly human needs. And so you're right to connect. You're right to connect it to basic human needs. But we are social animals, and so we sort of, if you put it another way, you don't really notice that you've got good relationships until you have bad relationships.
Yeah, that's a fair way of looking at it.
You don't really notice relationships until they're bad. You just crack on, don't you? Otherwise.
So then, if we think about then because I think then the question then that comes up, if we think about then, I don't want to use the phrase hygiene factor, right? But like if connection is this
Mm.
integral thing that is not necessarily driving engagement, but is let's call it a risk factor instead, right?
Yeah,
If you don't
yeah,
have it, it's a problem. What should HR people or businesses be thinking about in terms of connection? What should they be doing to make sure they keep it?
yeah. I think there's, I think there's a on one level there's creating shared experiences is really good. Um, Giving people, if you talk about actually building relationships, doing something positive to do that, helping people, giving them shared relationships is really helpful. And so things that we might sometimes poo-poo, right? The team building day
You're
or
going to say
the
Pizza Friday, aren't you?
or Pizza Friday or whatever. These sort of rituals, these events can be really useful, but on their own. But if you have those and then other factors are working against relationships, then you're going to have a problem. So I think the other thing I would say is that it's really important that people have that you're not creating barriers to those relationships. You don't have to do too much to enable relationships, but you can disable them. So things like I think basically time and space. If people are so pressured, so overwhelmed with work, they're just not interested in each other. All I need is to be in control of what I'm doing. Sorry, I can't help you. You've got a problem. Yeah, I don't want to hear about it. I just need to get through my day, and need to get home, and then that's a barrier. And then
Mm.
I think another barrier that is around things like performance management and the way that people are managed, rewarded, and the way that the system is set up. So if you over promote kind of individualism, competition, basically, then again you're creating a barrier to those relationships developing, and we can see that the way that we incentivize people, the way that we divide, the way that we set processes to work and stuff is if you overemphasize the individual and the role of the individual versus the role of the team, then you're going to pit people against each other.
Feels like you're saying like it sounds very obvious, but don't micromanage and just kind of let people be
Yeah.
outcomes focused rather than like task orientated, right? That feels like the sort of mechanic there behind it. Letting people just do great work, get the outcome, shoot for the outcome, but like
Yeah.
get there on their own.
Yeah, I think it's the over managing of
Yeah.
short-term performance. Like we, you know, it's easy to see in a work setting how managers, who, perhaps because they're under pressure, need to feel in control, and then they step in. It's correct. Of course, we want to manage performance, but it's the over management of the short term. What have you done today? What have you, rather than are we moving in the right direction? Are we broadly achieving our goals?
Yeah.
It's the what did you do with your time there? What did you, all that sort of stuff.
Was that the best use of your time? Is a
All
complex.
that sort of stuff.
Because sometimes you have to have that conversation, right? Like it does.
Yeah,
I'm not saying you
absolutely.
can't. That's a poo poo area, but like actually, it's about it being appropriate and not being the default. I think is more the point.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing.
And it talks about autonomy as well, but but these things are not, they're not kind of the hard boundaries between all these different concepts. As one interaction at work could touch upon different human needs at different times.
Of course,
At
there's
the
nothing.
same time.
There is nothing black and white
No,
in any of this
absolutely.
stuff, right? We're talking about like complex cultural structures and hierarchies, and
Yeah.
the very thing of going to work is just not that. It seems simple, but when we try and actually design it, I think it gets a lot more complex. Like anything, the closer you look, the more complex it really is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. I kind of like that was like we've kind of rolled the point one and point two together, which is kind of interesting to me. But
Excellent.
the last one, the sort of third point I really wanted to sort of focus in on today was about senior leadership. And the report found that like senior leadership has had a significant influence on employee engagement, which again seems very self-evident to me, right? What areas though, in like when we think about the specifics of it, actually, what's your take on what we actually found this time around, like in terms of the connection that senior leaders and that have and that influence that they really have on a business?
Yeah, it is. When we talk about leadership within our surveys, we tend not to be asking like for direct observations of the behavior of the leadership team, because we're dealing with organizations with thousands of people, if you know, in the most cases sometimes hundreds, but mostly talking about thousands. So we don't people that are answering the survey don't see their leaders that often. So what we're asking them generally is things like, do you have a sense of confidence that the organization is going in the right direction? Do you understand the sort of the vision mission of the organization? Do you trust the senior leaders to make the right decisions for the company as a whole? And do you feel that they care about you? So they're broad kind of judgments that are based on things that may or may not be happening in their workplace.
Okay.
And we find that this is a powerful, index when it comes to engagement. And usually, one or two questions, different questions for different clients really stand out. But confidence in the direction of the organization is often, really important.
I mean, I know one of the challenges we even have in collecting this data is how we define what we even mean
Yeah.
by leader here. Because like, there's so many different layers. Is it my direct line manager? Is it my head of department? Is it area manager? Is it a general manager? Is it the CEO and the C-suite? Like, what do we, when we say actually that senior leadership has a significant influence on employee
Yeah.
engagement? Who are we referring to?
We try and avoid that direct kind of reference. We'll use phrases like I trust our most senior leaders. So the whole thing about trust is that it doesn't require me to know. If I say I trust you to act in the best interest of the organization as a whole, it means I don't know that you are. I believe that you are.
I was going to
And
say
I
it's more
believe
like
that
I
you are
believe.
because
Yeah.
other things are happening.
Yeah.
It's a proxy. It's a proxy for other things. So and some of them are more direct, like I understand what we're trying to achieve as an organization, or we have a compelling, vision and mission for the organization. That's an indication that leadership are doing the right things. That they're communicating those things clearly. The question that I believe that our senior leaders care about us is the feeling that problems are being addressed, that people are being allowed to have bad experiences, or that things are being done to address problems, etc., etc. So we although sometimes clients will want to put something in there about what senior leaders means, we try and actually avoid that kind of, because I'm not saying, well, it's about Ted Hewett, CEO. It's about a kind of general representation of the way that the organization is being led.
Yeah, because I thought you were going to name drop Nick then for a second and put him in it. But it's so, because I've always found the trust at work is a really complex one as well. Trust in people, like in our personal lives, trust is a thing that we've sort of raised to believe that it is earned. Right? It's not something that intrinsically kind of happens, but there are certain structures where you're sort of forced to, whether it's political or sociological structures. When you join a club or something, you just, there's a trust that the people at the top of that are in some capacity doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Work is more in that space. That it's not, and of course, there's the adage of like I was talking to Sarah, one of our client success managers, about this week, about trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback, right? And I think senior leaders actually have a benefit in a lot of ways when you join an organization. I think there is an intrinsic level of trust. I believe that things are going in the right direction just based on what I can see and feel and hear when they in the build, like, call it in the culture of the space. And from the work you do with our clients then, and thinking about both this report and your own understanding of it, what are some of those things that senior leaders should be doing to maintain that trust at the moment? What are the kind of pillars that are building that and creating a space where people can be more engaged because they trust?
Yeah, I think, and this comes up quite a lot with clients, I think it's be seen, get out there, communicate. And it's obvious, right? It's obvious, but
Well, it sounds obvious.
everybody thinks they're communicating enough. And generally speaking, we're all under communicating. People, it doesn't, if you say, oh well, someone from the leadership team gets out to that site once a year, you're relying on that being, a big deal for people. You're relying on everybody being there that day. You're relying on a whole number of things. So being out there, communicating, keeping people up to date through as many channels as possible, but also listening. So it's not just about, when we talk about communication, we're not just talking about being out there and on transmit and doing a town hall and saying, and then getting back in your chauffeur-driven car. It's be there, spend some time with people, listen to people, and then the other really important thing is act. I mean, it's the number of times when I've been in sort of senior leadership sort of debriefs, and then was things like processes are perceived poorly, etc. And it's like, guys, this is it's in your gift to do something about this. You're the people in the room that can commit. You can make this decision.
You can make the change.
And actually, until you commit, probably other people can't. You might not be the ones that are going out and fixing the problems, but you have to make that commitment, and you have to make because I think that making that commitment also means making the resources available, making sure people understand they have permission,
enabling
to
people
go out and focus, and they're enabled to fix them. And I think because that big question is that question of senior leaders care about people who work here. It's people say, well, how do we fix that? Well, you fix that by doing all the other things that have come out of your survey, all the actions that we've given you, the focus areas, the recommendations made. You change that by fixing those things.
I was going to say, that even that question in and of itself, I feel like our senior leaders care about me. That's that's in the sort of feel element of our framework, right? So like,
well, that's actually perceived environment.
Is it? Okay, so that's interesting, right? So
yeah, because it's when I say, even if you say I feel that, what you're actually saying is I think that.
In my environment, I experience the care, or like I feel the care of, right?
Or my belief is that these guys care.
Yeah.
So when the perceived environment, you're asking about the third party, you're asking about the environment, you're asking about the company. So what do I think of that?
Yeah.
And even when you use words like feel in that setting, it's still a think question.
That's super interesting because it flows through. Like when obviously the important bit about that is that's something you can control and in some capacity can change. We can't tell someone how to feel. What we can do is create opportunities for them to feel that way. So like again, this feels what you're saying. Communicate, be seen, be not just be heard, but listen and like actively listen to what people are saying, and then do. Those are all parts of someone's experience of work, right?
It's obvious, isn't it? But it's interesting because when you spend time with senior leadership teams, when you don't spend time with senior leadership teams, and you're not exposed to them, you think that they're kind of this powerful group of people who've probably got all the shit sorted out and all that stuff. But they are just people, and they have their own fears and they have their own uncertainties. And well, I remember the first time I started really spending time as part of a senior leadership team, and I realized that we were just another group of people. And so sometimes we hold our leaders on a pedestal and expect too much of them, and then we judge them when they don't deliver what we expect. But they're struggling along as well. But I think sometimes they just need to be reminded that you can't, this is stuff that you're the people that can do something about this, or you're needed. You have a role to play in this, even if ultimately someone that works for you is going to be the person who takes a lead on it.
So. Rob, we're coming to the end of our time. I guess, have you got any final thoughts about the findings of the report, or anything you kind of want to sort of leave everyone to think about?
No, I think there's so much in there. hopefully people find it interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there. And, the key thing is it's not to look at it as a blueprint for success, but as something that should be thought provoking, encourage you to reflect on your own environment. We're not describing your own, your environment in your company, but hopefully people find it interesting.
Well, hopefully you'll see, and if you do happen to download it, I seen a couple of people have downloaded it while we've been on, which is awesome. If you you might see some things that you recognize in your own business. Equally, you'll see some things that you don't, and hopefully that gives you some inspiration of either things to think about, whether that is to do with the way you conduct your employee listening and like the ways in which you ask your questions, the indexes you look at, or even just like the things you might want to tweak and change or just think about in terms of your people strategy. Hopefully you find some inspo in there too. Wonderful. Well, that's been amazing. Thank you, Rob. Thank you for joining me this morning. I know you're very busy at the moment, so I appreciate your time. And we'll love you and leave you. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone out in LinkedIn land. And as always, be excellent to each other. Peace out.
Cheers.